It was a rainy and gray afternoon, the kind of day when the city seemed to hide under a thick blanket of clouds. The biting wind made the leaves fall, spinning like small dancers on the deserted street. Laura, with her wet coat and dripping hair, walked alone along the sidewalk, her footsteps echoing softly in the city's silence. She felt every drop of rain that hit her face, cold and insistently, as if time were trying to tell her something. There weren't many signs of life around. The shops were closed, and people who usually hurried through the streets seemed to have taken refuge in their homes away from the storm. The scent of wet earth filled the air, a mixture of leaves and concrete, creating a feeling of nostalgia, something that reminded her of her childhood. But for Laura, that city no longer had the same charm as before. She looked at it now with an almost painful distance, as if the streets were filled with the shadows of something that could not be forgotten. Her mind wandered to the argument she had had with her mother earlier that day. Those harsh words, the gazes that didn't meet, and the feeling that something was incomplete between them. I don't belong here anymore, she thought. Anger, frustration, and discouragement mingled, becoming a constant weight in her chest. Her mother always insisted on reminding her of her past, but Laura knew she couldn't go back to that place anymore. Not that way. Not with the ghosts she carried. Laura continued to walk, the sound of her footsteps muffled by the hum of the wind. She didn't know where she was going, but something inside her seemed to pull her forward, as if there was something more to be discovered, something she couldn't avoid. And it was at that moment that she saw him. As his figure formed on the street corner, the image seemed to be distorted by the incessantly falling rain. A man of the medium stature, wearing a dark coat and an undefined expression. But it was his gaze that made her stop in her tracks. Those eyes, brown, intense, and at the same time devoid of any expression that could be easily deciphered. Laura felt a wave of familiarity, a sudden warmth that rose to her throat. But at the same time, a subtle sense of fear, as if it were impossible to understand what that gaze truly meant. She didn't know what was happening. She didn't know who he was. But there was something there, as if he were an invisible presence in her life, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Laura hesitated for an instant, her feet paralyzed. But something inside her, an instinctive impulse, made her move forward. And then, she was standing in front of him. The man observed her with the same intensity, as if he were trying to fit a piece of a puzzle. Laura felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something about that scene that didn't make sense. He didn't move. He didn't seem uncomfortable. He just stared at her, and the feeling of recognition intensified. She was the first to speak, breaking the strange silence between them. "Excuse me, but you look so familiar to me." Laura's voice came out low, hesitant, as if she were trying to understand what was happening. The tone of her voice seemed almost a whisper, absorbed by the sound of the rain. But somehow he heard her clearly, as if the words carried a profound weight. Gabriel frowned but didn't avert his gaze. He took a step closer, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the rain. A charged silence hung between them. There was something strange in the air, something undefined. He seemed to be searching for words, for some explanation that would fit. "Me too. I know you from somewhere," he said, his voice low, almost as if he too were trying to understand what was happening. But there was something more in it, something Laura couldn't identify. It was as if he were trying to hide something, but his eyes betrayed a feeling she couldn't describe. The wind blew harder, making the raindrops hit both their faces. Neither of them moved. The city seemed to have stopped around them, and the only sound heard was that of the storm, now stronger, more present. Laura looked at him, feeling a growing fear. There was something in his presence that seemed to invade her space, something she didn't want to let happen. But at the same time, a part of her felt it was impossible to push away. "You are Laura, right?" he asked now with more certainty, as if he had discovered something he already knew. Laura's heart skipped a beat. She took a step back, feeling a chill that wasn't just from the rain. How did he know her name? And why did he seem so sure of it? How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice trembling, though she tried to hide the growing panic. Gabriel hesitated for a moment, looking at her with an expression Laura couldn't decipher. He seemed lost, as if he were trying to remember something. Before she could respond, Gabriel made a sudden movement, putting his hand in his coat pocket and taking something out. It was a photograph. He held it firmly as if it were a sacred object, something he couldn't let go of. Laura observed the photo with curiosity. But at the same time, a feeling of terror seized her stomach. She immediately recognized what she was seeing. It was an old black and white photo of a child smiling next to a woman. The woman in the photo had a serene gaze, but at the same time, a deep sadness. Laura swallowed hard. The woman in the photo was her mother. This is she began, her voice failing, the shock visible on her face. "But this is impossible." Gabriel watched her with a penetrating gaze, as if waiting for her to finally make the connection. He knew that Shek knew. And it was at that moment, with that look, with that photograph, that Laura realized there was no longer any escape. Whatever it was that had led her to that encounter, she could no longer deny it. Everything was about to change. The photograph Gabriel held seemed to carry an immense weight. Laura felt her stomach clench as the details of the image became clearer in her mind. She recognized the woman instantly. That was her mother, a younger version, smiling in a setting that seemed distant, in an era that felt as far removed as the very past she was trying to bury. But there was something wrong. Her mother's face, despite the joyful expression, was marked by a shadow, something Laura had never noticed before. This is impossible," she repeated, her voice trembling, her hand instinctively trying to reach for the photograph, as if she could find some explanation there, as if the image could give her some answer that her heart still couldn't understand. Gabriel, still holding the photograph, did not hand it over. His gaze did not waver. There was an intensity in his eyes that made Laura feel he was there, waiting for something she hadn't yet understood. "I know what you're thinking," Gabriel said, his voice calm, almost as if he was trying to soften the impact of his words. "But you can't run from this. Not now." Laura felt her mind reel. How did he know that? How could he understand the emotions stirring within her when she herself could barely sort them out? She looked at the man in front of her, trying to find answers in his face, but all she saw was the unknown. The question hanging in the air was the same one that had arisen when she first saw him. Why did he seem so familiar? Who had urgent need to understand? Something inside her knew that man had the answers she needed. Gabriel stepped forward, still holding the photo in his hands. He didn't seem apprehensive, but rather immersed in a distant memory. His words came out low, as if they were coming from a place he had tried to forget. "I am someone who was very close to you." And Gabriel looked at her with an almost painful intensity, as if he had waited a very long time to say those words. "I was responsible for a big mistake, Laura. A mistake that, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't correct. And your mother, she made me a promise, and because of that, many things were hidden from you. And from me too. Yuko." He seemed to be having difficulty speaking, as if he were pondering the consequences of each word. I can't tell you everything now, Laura, but you need to follow the clues. What you find will change everything. What your mother and I did, it affected your future and perhaps the future of many other people. Now you need to decide what you will do with this truth." Those words hung in the air, suspended, and Laura knew that the decision she made from that moment on would change everything. But what was she supposed to do with all of this? The storm wasn't just outside. She felt that something was about to be revealed within her, something that would make her see her life, her mother, and her history in a completely different way. The cutting wind continued to lash the city streets as Laura stood still, her eyes fixed on the photograph Gabriel held. Her mind was a jumble of feelings and thoughts. She could barely process what she had just heard. What was he saying? That her mother and he had shared something so great, so profound, that she didn't even know it existed. And why had it been hidden? Why was all of this coming to light now, so unexpectedly? The rain showed no mercy. Each drop seemed to increase the pressure on her shoulders. She was sinking into a sea of unanswered questions, and the feeling that something was about to be revealed grew with each passing second. The need to understand, to discover what truly happened, consumed her entire being. Gabriel watched her intently, waiting for her reaction. Laura felt a shiver as she noticed the pain and regret in his eyes. It was as if he were sharing a burden, something he had carried for years, and now she was being forced to carry it too. "I don't understand." Her voice faltered for a moment, and she swallowed hard. "Why did my mother never talk about this? Why did she never tell me nothing?" Gabriel sighed deeply, as if he were pondering whether he should continue. He seemed to want to say more, but the words seemed too heavy. Finally, he took a step forward, extending the photograph towards Laura. "Because she made a promise." Gabriel's voice was grave and serious. "A promise that involved you, Laura. Something that prevented her from talking about what happened. Something that could have changed everything. The truth can be dangerous." Laura looked at the photo but didn't take it. Something inside her was hesitant. She didn't know if she wanted to know more, if she wanted to keep digging into the past. But at the same time, a part of her knew she couldn't shy away from the truth. She needed to understand. She needed to know what had really happened to her mother. And more importantly, to herself. Whose promise? And why is this so connected to me? The words came out harsher than she intended, but mental and emotional exhaustion was taking over her. She felt as if she were on a tightrope, about to fall into an abyss from which she could no longer escape. Gabriel looked at her with a gaze that reflected pain and resignation. He seemed to know that he was about to break something that could never be undone. He lowered his eyes to the photograph once more before speaking. The promise was made by her. Your mother sacrificed herself to protect you, Laura. And in return, she had to erase important parts of her own history. But you now are starting to remember, or at least you're starting to see the clues. Laura's mind was racing 1,000 miles an hour. What was he saying? Sacrifice? Protect? Erase parts of her history? What was so big, so important that she would have to be protected from it? And why did she have no memory of any of it? I don't know if I can believe you. Her voice was full of frustration and doubt. How can I trust someone who appears out of nowhere with a photograph and words that don't make any sense? You have to tell me what's going on, Gabriel. What really happened? Gabriel took a step back, seeming to weigh each word. He seemed not to want to place more burden on Laura's shoulders, but at the same time, he knew she couldn't escape the truth. Not anymore. It was too late to turn back. She had to know, and more than that, she had to choose the path she wanted to follow. I understand your doubt. Gabriel spoke, his voice softer now. But the truth is a powerful force, and although you don't remember now, something happened that summer. Something your mother and I experienced, and that you have the right to know. The truth is starting to come to light, and you can no longer ignore it, no matter how painful it is. Laura felt a tightening in her chest. She wanted more answers, but Gabriel's words still seemed like an enigma, a puzzle she didn't know how to put together. The idea that her mother had done something to protect her, that she had sacrificed something important, left her uneasy. But what would this sacrifice be? What would she have done to ensure Laura's safety? Gabriel took a deep breath and finally looked directly into her eyes. You need to go to your mother's old address. What you find there might be the key to everything. But remember, it's not just about your mother. It's not just about you. What happened, Laura, involved more people than you imagine. And what you're about to discover will change the course of your life forever. Those words, like a dark premonition, echoed in Laura's mind as she looked at Gabriel. He wasn't just asking her to go to a place. He was telling her she needed to do something, follow a clue, as if he were leading her to the center of a larger plot, something she didn't fully understand yet. Where is this place? Laura asked, her voice now firmer. She knew she couldn't hesitate anymore. Something was calling, fueled by her, something that forced her to go beyond what she knew, beyond what she was comfortable with. Gabriel watched her for a moment, seeming to assess if she was ready for the truth. Then, with a sigh, he spoke the words Laura never imagined hearing. It's where your story began, Laura. It's where everything connects, and where the future begins to take shape. Laura didn't know if she was ready for what Gabriel suggested, but at the same time she couldn't deny that something within her was pushing her towards this quest. Her mind was filled with confusion, but her heart pulsed with unexpected strength. The need to understand, to find the truth about her mother, about her past, was now a flame that could no longer be extinguished. She needed to know. Gabriel looked at her with a gaze that mixed understanding and apprehension. He knew she was about to make a decision that would change the course of her life, but he also knew there was no turning back. The words he had spoken were just the beginning, and now the truth was waiting to be unearthed. But he also knew that, by doing so, Laura would have to face her own shadows. Where did you tell me I should go? Laura asked, her voice now firmer. She was no longer hesitant. She had a mission, and she knew she could no longer postpone it. The decision had been made. Gabriel took a step forward, his eyes still fixed on her, as if trying to assess if she was truly ready for it. He extended his hand, pointing in the direction of a distant neighborhood where the streets were older and, apparently, lifeless. The address is there, Gabriel said, his voice calm. The house where your mother and I lived, where everything began. The place where you were born, Laura. Those words hung in the air for a moment. She had been born there. She didn't know. She had never known that. The fact that this neighborhood, this place, had some kind of connection to her mother left her more intrigued, but also apprehensive. What would she find there? What would her mother, who had always been so protective, be hiding from her? Laura looked at Gabriel, feeling a tightness in her chest. She knew he wasn't lying. There was a raw honesty in his words, a truth she couldn't ignore. But at the same time, the fear of what she might find seemed to swallow her courage. How can I trust you? She asked, her voice softer. There was no longer anger in her words, but a deep sadness. She wanted to trust, but something inside her still doubted. Gabriel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched her for a while, as if trying to decipher the conflicting emotions passing through her. Then finally he spoke. "You're right to doubt. The truth isn't easy to swallow, and I can't guarantee you'll like what you find. But what I do know is that your mother made difficult choices to protect you, and part of you will understand, even if it takes some time. I've guided you this far, Laura. The rest of the journey is yours." Laura knew he was right. The choices were hers now. And more than that, she needed to face whatever was buried in the past. She could no longer run away. "Where exactly is it?" she asked, already determined to move forward. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He took a small key from his pocket and handed it to her. It was old, with an appearance worn by time. When Laura looked at the key, she realized it was a house key. But why would he have kept it? "This key will lead you to the place," Gabriel said with a lightness in his voice, as if he were giving her something precious. "I don't know what you'll find, but I know this is what you need to do." Laura took the key, her fingers trembling slightly. The responsibility for what would come next was starting to weigh on her. But she knew there was no other option. She needed answers. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. "Gabriel." He watched her for a moment, as if weighing his words before saying goodbye. Then, with a final sigh, he walked away. "Be careful, Laura. What you're about to find will shake everything you know. But it's the only way to understand the truth." Those words echoed in her mind as she walked away. The key in her hands felt heavier with each step she took. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, and she knew that the answers she sought could change everything. Her life, her view of her mother, her very identity, nothing would be the same after what she was about to discover. Laura walked down the deserted street, her footsteps echoing amidst the sound of the rain. What she felt now was a mixture of anxiety and determination. She didn't know what the future held for her, but one thing was certain: she wouldn't turn back. She needed to know the truth, and for that, she was willing to face anything that came her way. She didn't know for sure what awaited her, but she knew that what was about to happen would change her life forever. She was about to discover something her mother had hidden, something that could shake everything she believed to be true. And fear, though present, was no longer stronger than her will to find answers. The house was waiting for her, and with it, the truth. The bygone era where time seemed not to have passed. The windows were closed, and although the door was partially open, there were no signs of life inside. It was as if the place had been abandoned for years. Laura looked at the key in her hands. The key Gabriel had given her was old, but it fit perfectly into the door's lock. With a trembling hand, she inserted the key and turned it. The sound of metal clicking into the lock was almost deafening in the stillness of the night. The door opened with a creak, revealing the house's interior. The smell of aged wood and dust dominated the air. The air was thick, as if time had stopped there, waiting for something, or someone, to bring it back to life. Laura stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The darkness was almost total, but she could distinguish the shapes of old furniture, covered with white sheets that looked like ghosts from the past. The house seemed frozen in time, and the silence that enveloped it was oppressive. She walked through the main room, her footsteps echoing through the silent walls. Every detail seemed to have been left exactly as it was. The bookshelves, the wooden chairs, even the paintings on the walls. Everything seemed so familiar, yet at the same time so distant. She approached one of the bookshelves, carefully pulling back one of the sheets. What lay beneath was not just a shelf of old books. There was a series of objects she didn't recognize, but which, in some way, seemed to have belonged to her mother. She touched one of the wooden boxes, her heart racing as she realized she was touching something that seemed to have belonged to her mother's past. A past she had never known. She opened the box and found letters, photos, and some objects that seemed to have been carefully stored. Among the papers, an envelope caught her attention. It was tied with a red silk ribbon and had an inscription in golden letters. For Laura. With her hands trembling, Laura opened the envelope. Inside, there was a handwritten letter with delicate handwriting that she recognized immediately. It was her mother's handwriting. My dearest Laura, if you are reading this, it means the time has come for you to know the truth. What I am about to tell you now is not easy to digest, but you need to know to a small room at the back of the house. Inside, the atmosphere was even darker and stuffier. Upon turning on the light, she found a small office. On the table, there were more letters, old books, and a strange-looking object. It was a metal box with symbols engraved on its surface, something that seemed to belong to another world, another time. Laura approached and opened the box. Inside, she found a series of documents. They were old records, which looked like reports of something very serious. She leafed through the pages, her eyes widening as the content became increasingly clear. They were investigation reports with details about experiments, involvement in obscure scientific research, and references to names she didn't recognize. But there was something there, something she felt was connected to her mother, and to Gabriel somehow. It was a mystery she needed to unravel. As she sifted through more and more documents, something made her stop. A photo fell from the box. She picked it up, and as she looked at the image, her heart almost stopped. It was a photo of Gabriel, but not as she saw him now. In the photo, he was younger, next to a man she had never seen before, and her mother was there too, smiling, as if in a moment of great happiness. The connection was forming, but Laura still didn't fully understand what it meant. What did Gabriel have to do with this? What had her mother done in that distant time, and how did it affect her life now? The image from the photo was still fresh in Laura's mind. The photo of a younger Gabriel next to her mother, smiling with a man she had never seen before. Something inside her, an unsettling feeling, was beginning to take shape. What did it mean? Why had her mother hidden all of this? Why was Gabriel now involved in it? She looked at the papers scattered across the table, her eyes moving quickly over the words, trying to absorb everything that it was written. But the more she read, the more questions arose, the more confused she became. It didn't seem possible that her mother could be involved in something so big, so secret, something so dark. The letter her mother had written to her was clear, yet full of gaps. It mentioned sacrifices, a difficult choice, and a buried secret that had been kept for a long time. And now, Laura was facing the truth, or at least part of it. She knew she could no longer ignore the questions, that she could no longer move forward without answers. Laura put the documents aside and stood up, pacing back and forth across the room. The house, now dimly lit by the lamp, seemed more like a theater stage where she was about to enact her own story. But what did the story truly mean? What had her mother done? And what should she do now? She looked again at the photograph and then at the key still in her hand. The weight of the key felt more intense now. The key to the past. The key to the secret. With a deep sigh, she put away the photo and the papers, feeling the growing weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She knew what she had to do. She needed to confront Gabriel. She needed to understand what he knew, what he had to do with all of this. She needed to go to him and demand answers, because something was definitely wrong, and she was tired of being kept in the dark. Laura took the key and left the house, locking the door behind her. The rain had subsided, but the wind was still blowing strong, as if the world around her was in perfect sync with the turmoil in her heart. She walked back to the deserted streets, where the sound of her footsteps seemed to be the only real sound. She didn't know what awaited her, but she knew she could no longer run away. She felt that every choice, every step she took, brought her closer to a truth she feared, but which, at the same time, she needed to face. Arriving at the place where Gabriel lived, she stopped before knocking on the door. Her thoughts were in disarray. What would she say? How would she confront him? She knew that the answers he had weren't easy, but she was ready to hear them, even if it meant destruction. She knocked on the door forcefully. There was no more hesitation. There was no more fear. She was tired of living in ignorance. After a few seconds, the door opened. Gabriel was there with tired eyes, but with an expression that Laura couldn't interpret. "Laura," he said, his voice low and cautious. "You came back. I thought you'd need more time." Laura stared at him, her eyes now firmer than ever. "I didn't come to talk about what happened in the past, Gabriel. I came to know the truth. I know you know what's happening. I know my mother and you were involved in something. So tell me everything now. I want to know everything." Gabriel watched her for a moment, the pain in his eyes visible. But he didn't hesitate to step back, inviting her in. Laura entered his house, and the feeling of familiarity she had with the place seemed strange. She felt as if she were reliving the past, as if their story, the story of her mother and Gabriel, was about to be revealed. Gabriel closed the door behind her, and in doing so, it seemed as if he were closing a chapter that could never be reopened. He led her to the living room and sat at the table, looking at her with seriousness. "I knew you would come, Laura. I knew that one day you would have to know her. I found the documents, the photos, and her letter. She made a promise, and I need to understand what that means. I need to know what you have to do with all of this." Gabriel sighed, and for a moment, it seemed as if he was carrying the weight of a secret that consumed him. He looked at her with an expression of sorrow. "The truth isn't simple, Laura," he began, his voice filled with sorrow. "Your mother and we were involved in something much bigger than you imagine. Something we both committed to protecting, not just from you, but from the world. We were trying to prevent something even worse from happening. But in doing so, we had to give up a lot." She made choices, and I made mine too. And at some point, the line between what was right and what was necessary began to blur. Laura watched him, absorbing every word. She didn't know if she should trust what he was saying, but she knew that deep down, he was being sincere. Whatever had happened between him and her mother, it was now part of her story too. What was this something? What were you trying to prevent? She insisted, her tone more urgent. Gabriel looked at her but there was still an emptiness, a gap she couldn't fill. He knew more than he was letting on. And what else involved him seemed to be beyond what he was willing to reveal. She remained silent, absorbing everything he had said. Every detail made her head spin, but nothing seemed to fit together completely. The truth he was trying to tell her seemed so distant, like a very big secret, a responsibility greater than she had ever imagined. Gabriel watched Laura with an expression that combined pain and regret. He knew how much the weight of what he had hidden was affecting her. And yet, he felt that the time to reveal the whole truth had not yet come. Gabriel, Laura began, her voice firm now, but with a touch of pain she couldn't hide. I cannot move forward without knowing the truth. He looked her in the eyes. And this time, it seemed he was finally prepared to reveal more. He took a deep breath, and suddenly the tension in the room seemed to have increased. I know you need answers, Laura. His voice was low but filled with a seriousness that made Laura's heart beat faster. What your mother and I did involved more than you can imagine. And throughout these years, the only thing I could do was try to protect you from all of it. But the truth will be hard to swallow. Laura approached the table, her eyes fixed on him, her body tense with anticipation. She felt she was one step away from discovering something that would change everything, and perhaps even define her forever. What happened, Gabriel? Tell me, she demanded, her voice laden with an anxiety that seemed to consume her entire being. Gabriel hesitated. For a moment he looked at the floor, as if gathering strength to take the next step. Then he finally raised his eyes to her, and the pain in his gaze was palpable. You have to understand, Laura. Your mother and I were involved in a secret project. Something much bigger than the two of us. Something that involved the government, scientists, and experiments. Experiments that somehow were related to what you and your mother were and what you could become. But this was never supposed to be revealed. Your mother made a choice, and she asked me to ensure you never knew the truth. Laura was speechless. What he was saying seemed impossible to believe, but at the same time she knew that Gabriel had never been one to lie to her. The feeling that he was revealing something very big, something that would change everything, filled the room. She didn't know what to say, but she felt an enormous void forming in her chest. What was happening? What was truly involved in all of this? And most importantly, what was her role in it all? What are you saying? Laura asked, her voice failing. What do you mean, experiments? What did my mother do? What am I? Gabriel sighed once more, the pain on his face more visible than ever. He slowly stood up as if each movement was burdened with the weight of a truth he no longer knew if he should carry. I know you won't believe it, but the truth is that your mother and I were part of an experiment, Laura. An experiment involving genetic manipulation, something the government and scientists were trying to control. They were trying to create something. To create you. To create a generation of people with special abilities. But it wasn't just about you, Laura. It was about all of us. It was about controlling the future. I didn't want that for you. Your mother didn't want that. That's why she did everything she could to protect you from knowing this. Laura was in shock. Gabriel's words made no sense, but at the same time, she knew he was telling the truth. The void in her chest seemed to grow, and the confusion became unbearable. Genetic manipulation? What did that have to do with her? What had her mother done for her to be involved in this? But my mother, Laura stammered, trying to understand. What do you mean she did that? How could she have protected me from something I never knew? Gabriel looked at her, his eyes now softer but full of pain. She sacrificed herself. She decided you should never know the truth. She knew that if you knew, your life would never be the same. But, more importantly, she knew that the fate of many depended on you. Laura, the experiment was interrupted, but inadvertently, what she did by hiding the truth from you created more problems than solutions. You need to understand, Laura. Your mother protected you, but the truth will change you. Laura remained silent, trying to process everything she had just heard. She no longer knew who she was, nor what she was becoming. Every word from Gabriel seemed to be a piece of a puzzle she didn't know how to put together. But what she knew somehow was that her life, her identity, was about to be transformed forever. What would she do now? She had started this journey hoping to find simple answers, but what she had discovered was far more complex and painful than she had ever imagined. The truth, which had seemed distant, was now closer than ever. But Laura knew that, from that moment on, her life would never be the same. She could no longer ignore what was before her. The destiny her mother had tried to hide. The secret everyone had kept. Now, everything was in her hands. The choice was hers. Gabriel, seeing the anguish and confusion on her face, took a step forward, threatened to crush her. Her mother's story, the secret she had kept for so long, what Gabriel had done, and what he was saying about the experiment, all of it was collapsing like an avalanche, and she didn't know how to stop it. The house where she was seemed more like a reflection of her own mind. Old, silent, full of unresolved mysteries. Gabriel still watched her with a deep gaze, as if he knew she was trying to process what she had just heard. He said nothing more. What more could be said? The truth was now before Laura, raw and bare, and what she would do with it depended solely on her. Time seemed to have stopped, as if the world around Laura had slowed down. Every second was an eternity as she tried to compose herself. What would she do now? What did Gabriel expect from her? The truth about the experiment, about her mother, was weighing so heavily on her that it seemed impossible to make any move. She felt tears threaten to fall, but she didn't let them out. Not now, not until she had answers. Gabriel. She'd. His words seemed not to make sense, but at the same time, they resonated somewhere deep inside her, as if she already knew, on some level, that he was telling the truth. She felt a tightening in her chest, a sensation that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't comprehend. A key to what? She asked, her voice almost She sacrificed more than you can imagine. The feeling that everything she knew was being ripped from her life made her falter. She looked at Gabriel, her body trembling. She wanted to believe him, but his words were like a knife cutting into her reality. What he was saying might be true, but she didn't know if she was ready to accept it. I can't believe this, she murmured, her voice low. My mother would never do that. She loved me. Gabriel approached her, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. She loved you, Laura, and that's why she did everything she did. What she knew, what you could become, she knew it couldn't be revealed. Not before the right time. But time is running out, Laura. The project What Your Mother and I Tried to Prevent is about to happen again. And now you need to choose. You need to decide if you're going to continue to hide the truth or if you're going to face everything your mother protected you from. Laura felt his words like a punch to the stomach. The weight of everything he had said was beginning to settle in. She didn't know if she could bear the truth, but a part of her knew she no longer had a choice. Whatever her mother had done, whatever Gabriel was involved in, all of it was now part of her life. She could no longer hide. What should I do? She asked, her voice full of uncertainty. Gabriel looked deeply into her eyes, as if seeing something within her that she herself didn't yet understand. You have to decide. Laura, you have the power to change everything. You can choose to stay in the dark or choose the light. What your mother did was a sacrifice to protect you, but you have the opportunity to make the choice now. You can destroy what has been built, or you can be the key to a new era. The choice is yours, but understand, the future is in your hands. Laura remained silent, absorbing his words. She knew she was facing something that would change her life forever. What would she choose? She didn't know, but the choice was hers, and she could no longer run away. Laura looked at Gabriel, the weight of his words still heavy on her shoulders. She knew the choice he had mentioned was not simple, but what would she do now? Doubt and anxiety mingled, and she felt a growing dread that once she made a choice, there would be no turning back. She felt that what she was about to discover could define not only her future, but also the future of everyone around her. The silence that followed was heavy, as if time itself was waiting for something. Laura sat in the chair in front of her, her gaze fixed on Gabriel, as if he were the only person in the world who could offer an answer that could pull her out of the darkness. The key to her truth was in her hands, but what should she do with it? Gabriel, she began, her voice tense. What exactly did the experiment intend to do with my mother? And what do you mean by control? This is all much more than I can understand all at once. Gabriel sighed deeply, and his eyes darkened, as if he were seeing something in the past that haunted him. He seemed to be trying to organize his thoughts, or perhaps looking for a way not to overwhelm Laura even further with the complexity of the situation. But he knew she had to know the complete truth. The experiment was conceived as a way to control the destiny of humanity. This wasn't just about you, Laura. It involved an entire generation. When your mother and I were recruited, we were just pawns in a much larger game. The idea was to create a bloodline, a lineage of people with extraordinary abilities, a new era of human beings designed to control resources, power, even the thoughts of the masses. And you, Laura, were designed to be the most important. To be the pinnacle of the and control. Gabriel's words pierced her brain like a sharp blade. Laura felt a pain in her chest, as if she were being emotionally stabbed. She didn't want to believe it, but she knew something within her was recognizing the truth. What Gabriel was saying made sense. Everything she knew, everything she believed her life to be, was built upon a greater lie. She wasn't just an ordinary person. She never had been. And somehow her mother knew it all along. This is a lot to process, Laura said, her voice faltering slightly. Are you telling me that my mother? She raised me knowing this? Knowing what I would be? What kind of being I am? Gabriel stepped forward, looking more vulnerable than Laura had ever seen him. He was about to reveal something even deeper, something he had probably kept for years. Your mother knew, Laura, and she did everything she could to protect you from it. She cut ties with the organization with everything she believed to be wrong. But the cost of that was enormous. When you were born, the organization wanted to use you. But she was so determined to ensure you lived a normal life that she began to hide everything related to your true destiny. She made you believe in something simple, something that seemed natural. But it wasn't. The life you had, with her, with the love you received, was all a construct. She did it for you. And for all of us, Laura didn't know how to react. She wanted to scream, she wanted to cry, but the words wouldn't come out. Everything she knew was now in tatters. She looked at Gabriel, her eyes welling up, trying to understand what he was saying. Everything was falling apart. I can't believe this, she said, her voice now almost inaudible. You want me to believe that my mother did all this knowing what she was doing? That my entire life was a game to protect something? Something I didn't know? Gabriel lowered his eyes as if he himself were struggling to accept what had happened. Yes, Laura, your mother did this to save you. But she didn't know what to do after things started to get out of control. When she realized how deep the manipulation was, when she saw the results of the experiment and what it would do to the future of humanity. She wanted to protect you, but she also Gabriel's words creeping through her mind. What he was saying seemed to be the end of everything she knew. The key to the truth was in her hands, but doubt still lingered over her. She didn't know if she was ready for the truth, if she was prepared to live with what she had just discovered. But at the same time, she knew she could no longer hide. The choice was before her, and there was no turning back. She looked at Gabriel, her eyes tear-filled, yet resolute. Something inside her had changed. Fear was still there, but now there was something stronger, the need to take the reins of her own destiny. She could no longer be a pawn in this game. She had to choose what to do with the power that was being given to her. What should I do, Gabriel? She asked, her voice firmer, though anguish was still present. What do you think I should do? Gabriel watched her in silence for a moment. He seemed to understand the weight of the choice she was about to make. He knew that Laura's decision would affect not only herself, but the future of everyone around her. It's not for me to decide, Laura, he replied softly. What you do now will define the future, not just yours, but everyone's. You hold the key to change the course of things, but you also have the power to destroy everything. What your mother did, what she tried to hide from you, is the only reason you are here now. It was no accident that you were born. It was no accident that you found these answers. Laura looked at the window where the night was endlessly creeping in, as if time had stopped for her. She knew that by making the choice, she would not only change her life, but also the destiny of everyone connected to her. What would that destiny be? What should she do? I can't go back to what I was, she said, more to herself than to Gabriel. My life, everything I knew that no longer exists. We need to do something with this. I need to make the right choice. Gabriel nodded, understanding. He knew that however much she wanted the truth, there was still too high a cost. But he also knew that if Laura was capable of facing the truth, she would have the power to change everything. She was on the verge of a revelation that would not only shape her future, but also the future of others. They had to act. The future is not a straight line, Laura. Gabriel spoke with an intensity that made her heart race. What you choose now will not only determine what happens to you, but what happens to everyone around you. The truth, however painful it may be, is something you cannot ignore. And for better or worse, it is your decision. Laura felt the weight of those words sinking into her chest. She was standing before an abyss. The line between what could be and what she had to do was thinner than ever. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew the decision was hers. She rose from the chair, feeling the urge to take action, to finally do something with the truth she now possessed. She didn't know which path she would choose, but one thing was clear in her mind: of healing, no matter how painful it might be. Laura nodded, and for the first time, she felt ready. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew there was no turning back. She had to act. She had to choose what to do with what she knew. Her life, her identity, her very existence, everything was now in her hands. She walked to the door, determined to move forward. But before leaving, she turned to Gabriel, who was still watching her with an understanding gaze. "I don't know what the future holds for me, but I know that at least I'll be able to take the reins of it," she said with a sad but firm smile. Gabriel didn't answer, but his gaze said it all. He knew she was ready. He knew she would choose the truth, no matter the cost. And deep down, he knew that this decision would make her stronger than anyone could imagine. Laura opened the door, and looking out into the night, she felt the last piece fall into place. She knew she couldn't change the past, but the future was in her hands. The choice was before her. The truth finally would be revealed. Laura walked through the night, her eyes fixed on the darkness ahead of her. The cold wind cut at her skin, but she didn't feel it. Everything she had discovered, everything Gabriel had revealed, still swirled in her mind. But somehow she felt a growing peace. Not the peace of ignorance, not the peace of denial, but a peace that came from choice. She had finally made the choice not to hide anymore. Every step she took seemed firmer, more resolute. She knew her life would never be the same. What she had discovered about her mother, about herself, about the experiment, were truths that would define her in ways she never could have imagined. But deep down, there was something within her that was prepared to face it. The truth had a weight, but also a liberating force. Upon reaching the highest point of the city, where the view of the as ruas iluminadas pareciam oceano de luzes, Laura parou e olhou para o horizonte. O futuro estava diante dela. O que ela faria com isso agora? A dúvida não mais a dominava. A escolha estava feita, e com isso, ela sentia que sua própria identidade, algo que ela sempre buscou, estava se moldando diante de seus olhos. Laura fechou os olhos, sentindo o vento suave tocando seu rosto. Tudo parecia em seu lugar, embora as peças de sua vida ainda estivessem em desordem. O peso do passado estava atrás dela, mas a responsabilidade do futuro estava na ponta de seus dedos. Ela se lembrou das palavras de sua mãe, da carta que ela guardara durante tanto tempo. "Eu te amo mais do que tudo no mundo e faria qualquer coisa para garantir que você tivesse uma vida normal." Longe do que aconteceu. A dor no coração de Laura, ao ler essas palavras, ainda era recente. Mas agora ela entendia o que sua mãe fizera por ela. O sacrifício de sua mãe não era apenas um gesto de proteção, mas um testamento do amor incondicional que ela sentia. Por mais que a vida de Laura tivesse sido forjada em mentiras, ela também fora forjada pelo amor. O amor que sua mãe tinha por ela. O amor que ela agora sentia por si mesma. O amor que ela, sem saber, nutria pelo mundo e pelas possibilidades que o futuro oferecia. Laura respirou fundo, sentindo-se mais forte greater than anything she could control. But at the same time, the choice was hers. She could face whatever was to come, or she could try to hide again. But as she looked at the city before her, she knew there was no turning back. The choice was no longer between good and evil, between saving or destroying. The choice was about who she truly was and about what she wanted to be from now on. What would she do with the power she now held over her destiny? She looked at the night before her and smiled, for the first time, with a sense of true freedom. The choice she had made was not the end, but rather the beginning of something new, something only she could define. She knew that, however difficult it might be, the journey she was about to embark on would be hers, no longer dictated by external forces, but by her own will to be who she truly was. As she turned to walk back towards what was to come, she felt a lightness. Not because the weight of the past had disappeared, but because she had learned to carry it with dignity. She knew now that no matter what happened, she would have the power to shape her own future. She was no longer at the mercy of a story she hadn't chosen. She was writing her own story. And in doing so, Laura knew that although the path ahead was uncertain, what she would choose now would finally be what she truly desired. Laura was ready for what was to come next. She felt a sense of empowerment she had never imagined feeling. The doubts were still there, but now she faced them head-on, with the confidence of someone who had already confronted the greatest of fears: the truth. She took a deep breath once more and took the first step, a step towards her new destiny, a step that would lead her to where she was meant to be according to her own truth, the truth she had chosen to live. The end of her journey did not mean the end of the story, but the beginning of something much bigger, a story she would write with all the blank pages before her. Laura's story was far from over. It had just begun, and now, with the truth in her hands, she walked towards freedom,